What's up, everybody? It's Haelian, and I'm finally doing what so many people have asked me to do, and I'm making at least one tier list. We're gonna do all the weapon aspects in Hades, all 24 of them. We're kind of gonna break down how I feel about them, and then also, maybe discuss, the usage cases and how they're good in different situations and things like that. Now, when comparing the different aspects, I'm mostly gonna consider things like casual use and maybe like how high to heat you can comfortably go with that particular weapon aspect. I'm gonna think a little bit about speed, but not probably too much. I'm gonna think a little bit about the fun factor for sure, probably a lot about the fun factor, honestly, and just how much variety the aspect can actually give you, or is it just kind of you get one thing, you use the one thing, and that's all it can really do. All right, if you're not already, make sure you hit the subscribe button below, throw a like and a comment if you don't mind on it, and let's get started, okay? All right, we're gonna do one weapon at a time, so we're gonna start with sword, and then go spear, and then shield. I think that's best just because then we can compare the different aspects within the same weapon, and kind of compare when would you want to use one aspect over another if you just want to do, say, a sword run, okay? So we got aspect of Zagreus for the sword over here for you from the wiki. So the baseline of what it does is it gives you more attack speed and more move speed depending on what level it is. Now all the Zag aspects are only 5 Titan Blood. And honestly, if you're a new player and you're wondering where to spend your Titan Blood, 5 Titan Blood is really so little in comparison to the other aspects that it's hard to just not recommend upgrading all of those first a little bit, unless of course you just really like the sound of one, or you saw a cool run by someone else using a particular one that you're interested in. But 5 Titan Blood is so little, and you can get up their power level up pretty quickly. However, there are some traps, and I think aspect of Zagreus for the sword might kind of be one of them. So what I mean is, bonus attack speed and move speed is not great with the sword. Generally, with the sword, you want to be dash striking a lot, throwing out specials and things like that. Doing the full sword combo, just mashing the A button or X button, I don't even know what it is, over and over and getting that swing thrust combo going is not a great way to succeed with the sword, I've found. It's kind of hard to actually win just using the full sword combo, I think, most of the time without using the majority dash strikes instead. Move speed is what it is. It's okay, 15%, it's something. The main usages here, I'd say, for aspect of Zagreus on the sword is probably if you think or hope you're gonna get Flurry Slash, because then you can just hold down the attack button, and that's a lot of fun, I think. There's some other really niche cases, maybe. I'm thinking maybe Curse Slash to get more health recovery, but it's kind of hard, I don't think Zag Sword is very good overall, honestly, in any form. It's cheap is really its only thing, but it doesn't really do anything better, and you'll find out why I don't think very highly of it when we talk about the next aspect. So I think this is a pretty easy ranking for me. It's gonna have to go at the bottom, But the thing is, you gotta keep in mind, like, it being a Zag aspect and only costing 5 Titan Blood, as a new player, like, I would almost want to give it a C, but not in this case, I think. Not in this case. All right, next up for the sword, we got aspect of Nemesis here. So for 3 seconds after you use your special, your attack may deal critical damage. And if you don't know, critical damage is actually incredibly powerful in Hades, as is in most action RPGs probably. But what's special in Hades compared to other games is it actually does triple the damage, not just double, which you might see in most other games or something like that. And there's definitely a lot of supplementary boons and modifiers to make the critical hits either hit harder or hit more often. So criticals are incredibly good. So just reading the fact that you can get some crits out of this is really powerful. So you get 30% crit chance at max level on Nemesis for 3 seconds after using your special. Now, the attack pattern you'd probably want to use with this is to dash strike twice, or however many dashes you might have if you get extra from Hermes. Dash strike twice into the enemy, use your special, rinse and repeat. That way you always keep up that additional crit damage, and you don't really lose out any downtime in dealing damage. It's not super safe, but none of the sword builds, I'd say, are super safe in that sense, because you gotta be in melee range and stuff like that. But it's a pretty powerful attack combo, and it just always works, honestly. And just adding so much more damage to it, it just does what Zag Sword can't really. It actually adds more damage to what the attack pattern you want to use does, you know what I mean? So it's 15 Titan's Bloods, that's not that bad. And not only that, but if you look at the levels, at level 1, it's 15%. So I'd recommend Nemesis Sword. Like, if you're thinking about where to spend your Titan's Blood, Nemesis Sword should just come first. If you're just looking for some straight gameplay from the sword, I gotta say. It's a very powerful aspect overall, I'd say. Within the sword realm, it's probably the highest damage output. It's not super safe because you gotta get up close and personal to enemies. Not a ton of hammers really work, but I think that's just sort of a sword problem in general, that not many hammers really do help a lot. You know, or rather, there's a lot of dud hammers with the sword, I'd say, but that's another video probably. So for rankings, it's hard to say. It's hard to say, honestly. So again, I'm thinking mostly from someone playing 15, 20 heat. How easy is it to succeed with Nemesis Sword is the question, for a fairly average / new player. And I guess my answer is it's still pretty dangerous. You kind of need Athena's Dash as a new player to use this well and safely, I'm going to say. So I think this is a pretty good A slot. I don't think anything is going to reach S with the sword, honestly, but that's okay. That's just how it's going to be. But yeah, Nemesis, great aspect. It's a lot of fun to play. It does just kind of feel like you're one-tricking a little bit, but I guess that's how it goes for the different aspects and why there's so many different kinds. All right, next up we got aspect of Poseidon. This is sort of the cast aspect for the sword. Your special dislodges cast from foes, and it gives you passive cast damage 10 to 50%. It's unfortunate it starts as low as 10%, so it costs 16 Titan's Blood, so it's pretty much the same as Nemesis. It's pretty good. I mean, we've had sort of this rise in the meta for a lot of Hades players where certain cast aspects have become very, very powerful, it's apparent. And Aspect of Poseidon kind of got left by the wayside a little bit and kind of forgotten about, I think. And because some other ones just kind of hit the light a little bit harder, such as Beowulf aspect, namely, I'd say. Nevertheless, I think it actually works really well. The fact that it's passive cast damage is just really nice in terms of at least usage. It doesn't make it a super interesting aspect because of that. But what does make it interesting is the dislodge, which is a lot of fun. Now, there is that issue that some casts just don't dislodge, they just get thrown out there like Slicing Shot or Trippy Shot, So it doesn't really help there, but at least you still have that passive cast damage. I think this works best with something like, Electric Shot feels nice. I think Crush Shot pairs pretty well with Aspect of Poseidon. It's a lot of fun. Is it gonna make the game easy? I actually kind of don't think so. I think this is actually a tougher aspect to win with because 50% cast damage is good, but it's not quite enough to carry all the way to the end easily. I think the game's not going to be that easy. But what's great about it is that it has a lot of variety. Any aspect that generally makes good use of all the different casts in the game is just great for variety in the game, and it thus adds a lot to the fun factor, I think. It's tough to say, but I think I'm going to throw it in a B for now. It's a high B at the least, I'm going to say. It's probably top tier B at the very least. And again, the reasoning is I think it's actually kind of a tough aspect to use well, and it doesn't work very well with every cast, and I think it's still actually kind of hard if you're getting up in the heats to beat the game with it a little bit. Whereas Nemesis is just much more straightforward and just has a higher power level, basically. Next up, we have Aspect of Arthur. You have Holy Excalibur, and you get plus 50 health to your life total. You also drop down an aura when you use your special that makes you take less damage when you're in it. It slows down enemies' projectiles, and it disables traps. I think that's one of the coolest effects we actually have in the game that just is very different from most other things. It's a super chunky aspect, your attack is slow but heavy. It deals a lot of damage, but it comes out very, very slowly. It's definitely not great for beginners, I'd say, because it's kind of hard to get used to. Like, Hades is a pretty fast-paced game, I'd describe it, and Arthur kind of goes against some of the natural elements you might feel. But you can use it to great effect, and it's pretty good from a safety standard. I don't know if the special aura actually does a whole lot to make it that more powerful. I think it's mostly just the fact that the attacks are so chunky, and you get plus 50 health. I think those are the main bonuses for Arthur here. It definitely pairs well with, lots of different boons, really. You can kind of just get it going with almost any attack boon that is at least a percentage base. So it's pretty good. I think it's pretty safe. It does, you know, it's a hidden aspect, so it costs a lot of Titan's Blood. Luckily, the scaling doesn't matter that much because it just increases the damage reduction from the aura, so that's not a big deal. So if you unlock this and you just have a level 1 Arthur, you still get plus 50 health, and the attack is still chunky as all heck. So it's pretty good, at least from that standpoint, you know? So Arthur's kind of tough. It's, for me, personally, I've heard a lot of people love it. A lot of people have fun with it. For me, the slow, chunky attack kind of degrades the fun for me. Like, something about it, it's kind of hard to put my fingers on. You know, you're just swinging wildly at enemies with this huge AoE swing, and it's okay. I think I'm gonna have to put it as what's probably gonna wind up as a low B. I don't think it's quite C material, but I think part of the issue is that not a lot of the hammers make it more interesting than just the base version of Arthur. And it just kind of feels like it's always the same run a little bit when you take Arthur and you're just trying to get big numbers with the attack, essentially. Thus, I just don't have that much fun with it, I'd say. All right, we are now moving on to Spear. So first we got the aspect of Zag for the Spear. Your special damage, range, and speed is all increased from 10 to 25%, depending how much Titan's Blood that you've used. Now, it's only 5 Titan's Blood for a Zag aspect, so it's hard to, you know, belittle it too much, I think. But Zag Spear is one of those aspects that it's really one of a kind in a way, in the sense that it's really, I think it's kind of unique, in the sense that if you walk into Tartarus with Zag aspect on the Spear, and you don't have any hammer, you're not having fun, probably. Like, it's super slow. The throwing the special and pulling it back is just really clunky. It doesn't feel fluid. And the extra damage, range, and speed just doesn't feel like enough, is what I'd say. You know, now, having said that, some hammers actually make it really fun and pretty amazing, I'd say. The number one being Exploding Launcher, which just turns your special throw into an exploding spear. It's just really powerful, makes it really fun. There's not much else. There's some kooky stuff out there with the hammers, I guess you could say. You could actually just totally ignore the bonus of the aspect and just try to get the Flurry Jab hammer, which is just really overpowered, is the problem, I'd say, with that one, really. So whether or not you should invest Titan's Blood in aspect of Zag for the Spear, probably not, you know. Is it fun? It can be. The problem is if you get stuck with a bunch of spin hammers and you're kind of out in the middle of nowhere with you're in a canoe without a paddle or something like that, you know? You're gonna be flailing and the game's gonna trudge along, and I just don't think it's gonna be a lot of fun. Basically, spins are unique, but we'll talk a little bit more about that soon, I think. Now, having said that, I don't think it's quite as bad as Zag Sword, because at least it feels like we have some unique and different options that are kind of specific to Zag Spear. Like I said, like Exploding Launcher and stuff like that. It just feels like everything that Zag Sword does, Nemesis does better. Whereas Zag Spear, at least, like, there are some situations where, oh, I got this boon and that hammer, it would be best if I had Zag Spear, you know? So at least there's that going on for it. But otherwise, like, it's not very fun and it's not very interesting, I'd say. All right, next up we have Aspect of Achilles. Now, this is probably the most interesting aspect out of the spear, I'm gonna say. After your special, you can retrieve your spear with Raging Rush. So what is it talking about here? You throw the spear with the special, you hit the special button again, and you sort of teleport / quickly dash toward wherever the spear had landed, and you get this big bonus. It's a big bonus. So it starts at 50% and scales all the way up to 150%, depending on the ranking here. So it's for the next 4 attacks or casts, or a combination of whichever. And you do have to charge your special a little bit to determine where to throw it, but I don't think that's a big deal. Now, this is sort of the main power point for Achilles, because up to 150% additional cast damage or attack damage is a lot. It is a ton. That is a huge bonus. Remember Poseidon Sword, it was only 50%. I know it's passive, but still, you can pretty much keep up this damage bonus a lot of times with enough practice. And it's probably the number one aspect to just output big numbers with cast boons, I'd say. You know, one of the best things to pair this with is probably Electric Shot from Zeus, because that's a cast boon that normally does not have a very high power level, but it has a nice effect where it changes to enemies. By having an extra 150% cast damage, it really takes it to another level where it's actually gonna clear stuff very, very quickly. There's also quite a few hammers that just work really nice here. I already brought up Flurry Jab. It just kind of makes the aspect really fun, and it works with quite a few aspects. I'm thinking even the ones that, so this works pretty well with casts that don't lodge, you know, namely Crystal Beam, of course. Like, this has to be the best one for that, and probably for some of the other aspects, some of the other casts, especially the ones that don't lodge there. So it's a really nice aspect overall. It's probably my most fun and favorite out of the spear, 100% actually. That's pretty easy. It has a very high power level. I think it's fun to play. Is it S-worthy? I'm gonna say probably not. I'm gonna put it above Nemesis Sword because I think that it has a bit more variety to it in terms of gameplay than Nemesis Sword. I don't think it's quite S. I don't think it's quite S tier though, because S tier means it just has amazing survivability, I think, even as a new player, and I don't think it quite has that yet. Next up, we have Aspect of Hades. Oh boy. Your spin attack becomes Punishing Sweep. So you get an attack or special bonus for 10 seconds, anywhere between 30 and 150%. That's such a huge range. And it also increases your spin attack radius. So this is kind of hard to explain, I think, a little bit. So if you spin attack and hit an enemy, the enemy gets a debuff that makes them take additional damage from your attacks and your specials with this spear. It lasts 10 seconds, decent amount of time, right? As you can read here, punishing damage bonus does not apply to spin attacks. So it's almost like you don't even want to take hammers that make your spins better because you're really only using the spin to apply the debuff in this case, I think. It's a lot of Titan's Blood for this, and the range is huge here. It's really not an aspect I recommend for new players at all. It's something, really. It's kind of like they're trying to encourage us to use the spins with the spear, and I guess you would use it, but it just doesn't have a lot of use cases, I think. The best hammers here are probably, I don't know, Exploding Launcher and, oh yeah, you're gonna have to forgive me. The Serrated Point, I think it's called, where you dash strike into an enemy and you hit them 3 times and stuff, but there's a downside to that. It's not a bad aspect in terms of power level, but I wouldn't call it fun necessarily. I've seen some high heat clears, not that I can do it. I just can't imagine a lot of new players wanting to use this a lot. If you want to spam spins, it seems like you'd actually want to use Achilles, which at least gets a damage bonus on the spins, you know? Sure, you don't have as big of a range because the Punishing Sweep move is actually enormous. It covers like an entire room. But at least like your spins are gonna feel much more powerful, you know? It feels like with Aspects of Hades, you'd mostly use a spin attack and then spam, you know, dash strikes or, you know, your special move or something like that. It's okay. It's kind of a neat idea. I like the concept of the weapon. I kind of feel like the fact that it debuffs enemies instead of giving Zagreus the bonus makes it pretty wonky, you know? So clearing normal enemy encounters where enemies don't usually last that long with this, applying the debuff to all of them, it just sometimes, or a lot of the times, it just doesn't even feel worth it. So let's see. This is tough. I think because of the high cost of the Titan's Blood, I don't think it has a lot of survivability. It's tough. I'm gonna have to drop a D on it. I'm gonna have to drop a hard D on it. I think it's actually worse in some ways than Zag Spear, which it feels like it makes at least a couple moves more powerful. Whereas this feels like it's just a huge danger pit for someone who's fairly new to the game at, you know, running 10 to 20 heat, basically. It feels like it would actually be very difficult. You know, of course, this is just partially due to the fact that you're having to charge a spin and apply a debuff is just dangerous, I think, on its own, you know what I mean? After all the hate I just gave to Hades Spear, now's probably a good time to say, this is just my opinion, and what I have fun with might not be what you have fun with, and lots of people, I guarantee every single aspect on this list, all 24 of them, there's someone out there whose favorite is Zag Sword or Hades Spear or something like that, and there's nothing wrong with that. This is mostly from my point of view as someone with 2,500 plus hours in the Hades. Which ones do I have the most fun with, and which ones would I most recommend to new players, most likely? All right, last up for Spear, we got Aspect of Guan Yu. This is a controversial one, I think. So life total and life gain minus anywhere between 70 and 50%. So your max health is severely reduced, basically. It's pretty rough. And you're upgrading it not to get more powerful, not to make the aspect more powerful, but just to get some more health back, so it doesn't really feel good to upgrade this with Titan's Blood. It's probably one of the worst in terms of leveling up with Titan's Blood, I think. You wouldn't really want to do a run at level 1 Guan Yu. It just doesn't feel good to only start with, oh my gosh, what? Like 30 health, if you're running thick skin and stuff. It's just bad in that circumstance. However, Guan Yu actually has some really cool mechanics. So it has the spin attack with Guan Yu is actually quite a bit more interesting, I think, than the other spin attacks where it actually goes out and is actually a ranged thing. So you kind of throw out this spinning blade at enemies, and if you hit them with it, then you actually get some life back. And I think that's a really cool mechanic. And they did have to be careful with lifesteal on this game, because otherwise we just steamroll over anything if our life total was too high and you got enough lifesteal, So I understand why it happened for sure. I think the spin is really interesting and cool, and you can actually utilize it very, very well, I think. You throw Athena on your spin, and it just deflects everything around you, and you get the health back, and it's really cool, but you're still in super, super danger. I think it's a bad aspect in terms of survivability, but I do think it's probably more fun and interesting for me than something like Hades Spear, honestly. It also has a pretty dynamic special move where you don't actually have to pull the spear back, you just throw it out and it just goes out there. There's some ways to make it even more powerful, namely with the charged skewer hammer, and you can just have like a super easy time in a run. It's sort of like a cheesy build just because you're at a pretty long range and you deal a lot of damage with the special and you just spam it, and that's how you win the whole run. So I think that isn't particularly interesting because it's not diverse in terms of gameplay and stuff like that, but still, at least it's something that works with the aspect. I mean, people are gonna hate me for it, but I like Guan Yu. I do. I look at the health downside and I recognize it's horrible for new players and stuff like that, and the way it levels up with Titan Blood is also bad, but I think the fun factor kind of helps it and pushes it into our first C rank weapon. And I know, I don't have a single S right now. I know, but we're getting there. But yeah, I think this kind of makes sense for me. Like, when I think about which spears would I want to play if I were just doing a run or if I was just recommending it, this seems to make sense to me. This is about right, I guess. All right, we have now entered shield territory, so we got the aspect of Zag for the shield. So your attack and dash strike base damage is increased anywhere between 3 and 15 damage. So this is important to note, that this is a flat damage modifier, which is different from a percentage multiplier. If this was 3 to 15%, this would actually be significantly worse. I'm not certain what the base damage of the shield is without this, but it's actually a very significant increase. I think this is an aspect that it doesn't really sell itself that well because these numbers kind of look low when you first glance at them, and it might not sound all that interesting and stuff, but it's actually pretty decent. There's only a couple hammers that kind of work with it, so it's not super fun, I think, a lot of the time, and just kind of like a flat damage increase is just not that cool, really. I guess it's the best aspect to use if you're going to get those specific hammers that go along with the shield attack, but otherwise, it's kind of just, you might as well use another aspect most of the time. Pretty straightforward. At least it's cheap Titan's Blood. I would probably recommend it for a new player, probably, as long as you utilize the bull rush well and you block pretty well and stuff like that. But besides that, I think it just doesn't have a ton of places. I'm gonna drop it into a high C for now. I think this makes sense to me. I think it does a few things pretty well, and there's some fun builds with it, but it just doesn't do the best out of all the shield aspects, especially. All right, next up we have Aspect of Chaos. After you bull rush, your next special throws multiple shields. It kind of throws them in a shotgun spread. And the number of shields thrown varies between 1 and 5. This is a tough aspect to level up in terms of Titan's Blood. It costs 15, which is pretty much the same for all 3 aspects below the first aspect of each weapon. But this is kind of bad because I feel like a level 1 Chaos Shield is terrible. A level 2 Chaos Shield is terrible. A level 3 Chaos Shield is probably still terrible. It's really not until you get at least 4 or 5 that it actually starts to feel good, I'm gonna say. The spread is really, really useful though once you do have it leveled up, and it does really well with a pretty dynamic number of boons and things like that. This is one of the aspects that it almost shines best with boons that you might not normally use a lot. I'm thinking like Dionysus on the special for the hangover, Zeus, Ares, kind of like these gods that a lot of people kind of like shoo away from when they first start because they see big crits from Artemis or something like that, you know? But this is where those gods actually shine, just because you can kind of coat the enemies with these different debuffs using Chaos Shield. You just do a bull rush, throw out the special, and it works really well. I think it's cool. I think it's a great way to kind of get us to use all of the different parts of the shield. So they get us to use the shield charge, throw out the special, and then just rinse and repeat that charge again. And I think they did a great job in designing this one. It's also a super safe aspect because they're making you use the shield block and charge here. So if you're a new player, this aspect kind of forces you to get used to that, and I think that's actually great. And I think it's super high power in terms of a new player, and it's very straightforward. It's not complicated, it's not fancy, it just does everything well. Thus, I think from the points that I've made here, I'm gonna have to drop that into our first S-class aspect here. I think it's good. I think it's good. I am a little biased toward it because back in the day, it was my bang. You know, they did change it at some point after the 1.0 release of Hades, so it's not as powerful, but it's still quite good, and I still recommend it a lot for new players. But again, the main issue here is the cost of Titan's Blood. So I would not bother leveling this up unless you got enough to level it up all the way right now, or nearly, probably like at least level 4, honestly. All right, next we have Aspect of Zeus for the shield. Your special is replaced with the Blitz Disc. Blitz Disc base damage per hit goes up depending on the level that you have. So if you've never used this, you use the shield special and it slowly floats out there spinning. If it hits a wall or something, it comes back to you, but otherwise it'll just stay out there until you hit the special button again. And in the meantime, you can keep using your attack or shield charge, the bull rush, and thus you can kind of get 2 avenues of damage. I think this is actually an incredibly interesting and dynamic aspect in the game that you just don't really see this kind of like big brain gameplay with all the time, where you really have to manage 2 different things at once, and it's actually really interesting to play with at all times. There's definitely some cheesy factors there. In terms of leveling it up, it is pretty underwhelming at the lower levels, you know, but it's probably still doable at least, you know. At least you can still block and throw the special out there. So it's not as bad as, say, Chaos Shield in terms of trying to slowly level it up with Titan's Blood. It has a lot of different uses. You can just start a run. You don't have to even look for specific gods, I think. Like, it's not like you have to get this on the special, or you have to get that on the attack, you have to get this hammer or that hammer. No, it works with a lot of different things well. I just think it never really reaches the point where, like, okay, this is broken and I win. I don't think there's a lot of builds like that with Aspect of Zeus is the only thing. Having said that, I do think it's a lot of fun, too, and I can probably recommend it for new players. It takes some getting used to, I think, is the only issue there. I think this is a tough choice, especially when I have to compare it to other aspects that we see on the list here. I think it's a low A. I don't think it's quite B class. I think it's going to end up being a low A, if I were to guess. You know? I think it does a lot of things. A lot of different hammers work well with it, which is what's great, I think, there. And that just makes it much more interesting in my eyes, is the fact that you can use so many different hammers with it, and you don't have to really depend on like one or two specific ones. All right, we're coming up to some juicy aspects now. We got aspect of Beowulf for the shield now, so you do take 10% extra damage here, which I thought was always kind of odd. It just seems like a very small amount and kind of random with this, but okay, I mean, I guess it is what it is. It does have major upside, so I can see there being a downside, but 10% extra damage taken just felt a little strange, honestly. All right, so Dragon Rush bonus, damage plus area gets leveled up as you go. So it's talking about if you load cast into your shield, which is what this aspect lets you do, when you go to use your Bull Rush, you're gonna see this big dragon AoE effect as you charge in. So that will have higher damage and a bigger AoE effect. Now, the thing with Beowulf is it is such a high power level aspect that leveling it up actually doesn't matter that much, because the main upside to aspect of Beowulf, it's got to be the cast loading system here. So all the casts have a different flare effect than they normally do, and almost all of them work incredibly well with Beowulf. They get this massive AoE explosion that can be pretty high damage with it at the end of your Bull Rush, and it just works really well with pretty much every cast. You know, there's some odd ones there, like the Demeter cast is wonky, and Slicing Shot probably is not very good with it, as you can imagine. But otherwise, it works really well. It's a ton of fun, I gotta say. It's probably one of the most fun aspects I can play in the game still. And just all the different dual boons that you can get lined up with it, it kind of has this nice mix where it's an aspect that makes you focus on the cast, but still makes you think about some other things about the aspect to try to get everything going, basically, here. I think it's a lot of fun, and like I said, you don't have to worry about leveling the whole thing up, because it's going to be powerful right away, even at level 1, I think, because that Dragon Rush bonus is just not that important. It's going to be the cast, so you just get a chunky cast at the start, and then you just keep throwing palms on it, and maybe getting some dual boons to help supplement it, and you're on easy street, baby. So yeah, I'm going to give it an S. I'm gonna give it a high S. It might even be my top aspect of the whole list, to be honest. I can recommend it for new players. I'm not gonna say it's gonna be super easy to play right away. It might take some getting used to. It almost certainly will. It's kind of slow. It's kind of chunky. But once you get used to just loading the casts in, doing the Bull Rush to make them explode on the enemies, rinse and repeat, once you get used to that, I think you're gonna have a great time. All right, we're now in Bow Town here. We're going to start with Zag aspect for the bow. Critical attack chance. It ranges between 3 and 15%. It's 5 Titan's Blood to fully max it out. This is a great aspect, I actually think. It's one of the best Zag aspects in the game. Possibly the most. You know, the bow has a lot of hammers that are centralized using the attack well, and it just so happens that Zag aspect is really the only aspect out of the bows that just powers up the attack overall. So it feels like it actually fits in a pretty good place. Now, it still does rely on you to get at least one hammer that kind of utilizes the attack really well there, but I think it's actually good. It fits in a good place. Now, it's not very exciting because it's just like a flat damage increase when you think about it, but all the different hammers for the bow just kind of make it pretty interesting, you know, pretty straightforward. You know, I'm not going to talk too much about it because it is what it is. I would probably recommend throwing top 5 Titan's Blood in it if you're a new player, honestly, because I think it's worth it. I don't think it's quite an S. I'm gonna give it a high A. And I think it does survivability better for a newer player than something like Achilles or Nemesis, you know, because you have that range. Now, the bow does require you to get used to the attack timing and stuff like that, but once you do, you're going to have a good time, and I think it's going to be pretty safe by just having that extra range. All right, next up on the list is possibly a lot of people's favorite aspect here. We got aspect of Chiron. So what happens is when you hit an enemy with your attack, it creates this little lock-on bullseye on that enemy. Thus, if you use your special soon afterward, all of those shots home in on that one enemy. And as you level up, you get more shots. So there's that issue with leveling up Chiron that is pretty bad at the start. You like using it early on without leveling it to at least 4 or 5 is probably not going to feel very good. It's going to be pretty underwhelming. It also has this issue where the hammers, there's really only 2 good hammers with it, you know. However, I think it is one of the safest and most straightforward aspects you can use as a new player. And there's a lot of boon diversity as in terms of what you can use on the special. Dionysus works well. Artemis looks great. Aphrodite works great on the special. You know, there's quite a few there. And there's a lot of different combinations that work really well, I think, in terms of that. So I think it's actually a really fun aspect, too, that's kind of hard to explain. You know, I think the major downsides is the how it levels with Titan Blood and the fact that there's really only a couple hammers that help it. But it does also have another bonus, which is basically that you might not necessarily need one of those 2 hammers. You know, it's pretty good on its own. It's not bad, at least. I'm gonna drop it as an S, baby. That's right. That's an S-class aspect right there. It's a lot of fun, like I said. It kind of does things very differently compared to other weapons, I'd say. And it's also super safe, like I said. So I definitely recommend it for a new player if they have the Titan's Blend to spend. Because you can just be at a super far range and you don't have to have amazing amazing timing or accuracy or anything with it, because you get the homing ability and it doesn't require like perfect shot timing or anything like that. Great aspect, a lot of fun to play, and I know you guys love it too. All right, next up we got Aspect of Hera. You see a trend with the bow here. The bows are all sitting pretty high, I gotta be honest, so far, you know what I mean? So Aspect of Hera. Your cast loads into your next attack, firing on impact. Ooh, that's pretty good. I mean, you heard me talk up Beowulf, and that does a very similar thing, you know what I mean? So leveling up Hera, the cast drops sooner from enemies the higher level it is. A nice thing about Hera is the level isn't that important. It's nice to have, you know, it's nice to have so you get your cast back sooner, but it's not necessarily required, I would say, at least with some casts. This works really well with something like Press Shot from Aphrodite, or really a lot of the casts, you know. That's the nice thing about all the cast aspects is you just have so many more options, it feels, because the casts are all fairly well balanced, I would say. And you also got the bonus of utilizing a lot of those great attack hammers that I talked about with Zag Bow with Aspect of Hera. It's a fun aspect. It's kind of a tough choice here for me, and it seems almost crazy to rate it below Zag Bow, you know? One thing I will say about it, it's kind of tough to use. You know, it has what I would call a high skill ceiling, which means that the worst Hera player and the best Hera player are very far apart. You know, whereas the worst Chiron player and the best Chiron player, you know, are, you know, not that far apart is how I would describe it. You know, using Hera can be difficult. It can be clunky. If you miss, it's a problem. You know, things like that. Having said that, I still think it's a lot of fun. And man, this is hard. This is hard. So, man, Bow's taking off, you know what I mean? 2 bows right next to each other, is that crazy? Wow. I'm gonna have to drop it in a high A. It might be the best A out there, honestly. I think it's above Achilles for me. I think it's a lot of fun. It's not that bad to level up as a new player. And I think it just kind of has a cool element with the exploding cast. Now, it doesn't have the same AoE effect that Beowulf does. That's why it's not higher on the list. But it does do some cool things at the least, I think. All right, last up for Bow, we have Aspect of Rama. And as you level up, the shared suffering damage gets higher and higher. So what is shared suffering? When you use the special on Rama, it's like these dinky little darts, basically, you shoot out. They can bounce between a couple enemies. They don't deal a lot of damage, but it applies a debuff, and that debuff makes it so if you attack a different enemy than the one that has the debuff will take between 30 and 60% of that damage. Kind of hard to explain. You have to see it in action a little bit there. But it's good. It's a good aspect. It has a high power level, but it's incredibly difficult to use. It might actually be the hardest aspect to learn out of everything on the list here from a new player perspective, I'm gonna say. It's challenging, I think. There are some cheesy builds where you just spam the special with cool effects and things like that, and that works. And that's kind of nice that you have that part of the aspect that you can do, or you could go for the higher skill gameplay and just utilize this very, very slow charging attack and try to get big chunks of damage using that. So I kind of like that it has those 2 different things there. I think really because it's so hard to play with as a new player. Like, I still kind of struggle with it too. It's kind of reminds me of Arthur in that way, but at least it kind of does a little bit better than Arthur, I think. It's a little more fun for me. I'm gonna drop into a mid B, I think. It's kind of hard to say between these two. Like, we got Poseidon Sword right here, then you got Arthur right there. But this sounds about right to me. This sounds about right. I think it's a really great aspect, but again, it's hard to utilize, and because it's prone to punishing you for making mistakes, it makes it a little bit less fun to play. All right, next up we got the Fist lineup here. So we're starting off with the aspect of Zag, of course. And the thing I want to say about the Fist is the first three aspects, I'm talking about Zag, Talos, and Demeter aspect, all three kind of end up feeling the same a little bit. That's sort of my problem with the Fists overall, I think, is that they kind of all feel quite similar to each other. Yes, they do different things, but it doesn't feel that diverse, honestly. You're mostly just holding down the attack button and dashing all over the place. It's hard to use the special in a very decisive way, you know, just spam the special. That doesn't really work, even with something like Talos, I think. So I think the first three Fist aspects kind of suffer from that. Now, having said that, you get up to 15% dodge chance with Zag aspect for the Fist. It's 5 Titan's Blood. It's okay. I think a lot of these are gonna kind of wind up in the middle of the playground here, I'm gonna say. And so I think this is kind of just like, it's fine if you're low on Titan's Blood to just grab this, I think. Survivability is okay, because luckily the baseline Fists, you know, without even an aspect, is actually pretty powerful. So I think I'm gonna drop this at a high C, really, for Zag aspect. 50 dodge percent, it's not as good as it might sound, I think. You might not notice a big difference. Personally, for me, I'd rather something that ups our power level a little bit. Alrighty, next up we have aspect of Talos. Your special becomes Magnetic Cutter. Its pole deals 20 damage. What is it talking about here? When you use the special with aspect of Talos, you deal 20 damage to an enemy, you pull it toward you, that enemy then gets a debuff that makes it take an additional up to 50% attack and cast damage, and it lasts for 6 seconds. So this is one of those ones where I hear a lot of people, especially new players, say Talos is their favorite, or something like that. And I guess I've had a hard time figuring out why. I think it's kind of goofy fun. There's some cool stuff you can do with it, but it's one of those aspects where I don't think it does anything better than other aspects. Is the issue. I would almost rather use Zag aspect on the Fist than Talos. I mean, I'd probably do this just because additional attack damage is probably pretty good if you use the special. But in terms of, like, is this being a cast build for the Fist just doesn't feel right. Like, 50%, that's conditional. It only gets put on one enemy after you use the special. It's bad in terms of a cast aspect, I think, is my main issue with it. I'm afraid despite it being cool, and it has that cool pull effect to bring enemies towards you, but it's also super dangerous because of that. Therefore, I'm gonna have to drop Talos at a pretty hard, almost bottom of the pole D. All right, next up we got aspect of Demeter. So after landing 12 strikes, it's talking about attacks, using the actual attack button, your next special hits more times. Between 1 and 5 times. It's a lot of Titan's Blood, so this is one of the aspects that isn't gonna do well until you fully level it up, I think, therefore it costs a lot, but at least the effect is like really interesting. It allows you to put out a lot of damage, and so it tells you when the special is charged, and you can throw them all out, and it works with things like Explosive Upper, I'm talking about some hammers here, sorry. Some really cool hammers like Explosive Upper or Kinetic Launcher, and it just makes the effect really cool, I think, because of that. I mean, it doesn't do a lot differently from the other Fist aspects, I think. The power level is a bit higher, though. So, gosh, it's almost... I feel like it's almost not even a B, though, to be honest, for me. From a new player perspective, would I recommend it? I'd almost recommend Zag Fist better because this is a lot of Titan's Blood, and you're gonna get the same gameplay practically out of using this than from using Zag Fist a little bit, I think. It's tough. Oh boy, it's tough. I mean, I think just having straight dodge percentage is just not that fun or interesting. So I think I'm gonna rate it above Zag Fist, but I don't think it's that much more fun than something like Arthur, you know what I mean? People are gonna think that I hate the Fist, and I guess they're probably almost right. I don't hate the Fist, but I think it's actually the weapon that I overall have the least fun with nowadays. All right, in case you might have thought that the Fist hate was gonna end when we got to Gilgamesh, but you're gonna be wrong, I'm afraid. So you have the Claws of Enkidu, whose dash upper can maim foes. So what is it talking about here? If you hit dash and special at the same time when using Aspect of Gilgamesh, if you hit the enemy will take additional damage, percentage-wise, and it'll give them sort of that doom effect like from Ares, where after a period of time they will take anywhere between 100 and 400 damage depending on the level of Gilgamesh. There's a lot listed here that is not explained. Gilgamesh also gives you +2 dashes, I believe. And the dashes are a little bit shorter, but you can also just hold the dash button down. The fists themselves are quite slow, quite clunky. The special comes out slowly. The dash strikes are kind of slow. The dash strikes actually deal incredibly small amounts of damage, sadly, for Gilgamesh. I guess because they wanted you to try to use the big swiping claw attacks without just dash striking everywhere, which is usually what you do with most of the other weapons. Having said that, it's kind of in the same respect as Arthur or Rama, that it's slow and you're meant to play methodically, but Hades to me feels like a fast-paced action game that kind of punishes slow gameplay a lot of times. I do not have fun playing Aspect of Gilgamesh. I do not recommend Aspect of Gilgamesh to new players. I think it's a huge trap in terms of Titan's Blood. I think that the extra dashes are cool, and I like that aspect of it. I think the maim effect was a good idea, but unfortunately does not hold up, and it almost doesn't feel like... It almost feels like you might as well ignore the entire maim effect, because it also makes you take more damage, I should mention. Enemies that are maimed deal more damage to you as well. I don't have the percentage right in front of me, but it's not good, let me tell you. Oh boy. It's gonna be a D. In fact, dare I say it's the worst? It's probably not the worst. It's at least not boring like Zag Aspect of the Sword is. It's not boring. But I think it's gotten me killed too many times because it plays so weird. And it's just a very different thing. And they want you to... It's almost like they're incentivizing you to play a very slow-paced way, but the game punishes you too much for playing slow-paced, I think. So thus, I think I'm gonna have to drop it a hard D. Alright guys, if you haven't already, tell me what your favorite aspect is in the comments below, and tell me why I'm wrong about my opinion almost certainly, because I'd love to actually hear what you guys think about all the different aspects and why a certain one is your favorite too. So Aspect of Zag for the Rail gives you additional ammo for the Rail, up to 12 additional, which is 100% more. 5 times blood at max level. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. There's the issue with Zag Rail is there's not a lot of places where it's better than some of the other rail aspects. In fact, there's only like maybe 1 or 2 very specific instances where you'd rather be using Zag Rail than say Eris Rail, which we'll show you soon. I think for 5 Titans Blood is pretty good. I think the other issue is, like I said, there's only a couple instances that it does anything well, and that's about it. Therefore, it's not that fun or interesting to utilize, I think. You just throw Zeus's attack on this thing, and you practically win the game from the first boon that you pick up, though. I think one of the issues with the aspect itself, the additional ammo, is the fact that some of the hammers that you can pick up kind of make it so that that bonus in the aspect just isn't good. You know, it's not worth it, or it does nothing. They have the Delta Chamber Hammer that gives you infinite ammo. Thus, the entire aspect is void. You know, it didn't matter that you chose it. So I think that's one of the big issues with it. Nevertheless, I think for new players, it's still pretty strong. It's just not very interesting. It's kind of tough to say because it's so strong still. It makes me want to rate it a little bit higher. But I wouldn't really recommend it to players just because of some of the other aspects you're going to see here soon on the rail, probably. So I think that's why I'm gonna drop it at a pretty low C. Is it Guan Yu low? That's tough. I think, you know what? I think it's sort of a high C, to be honest. I think it's better than Zag Aspect Fist, but not quite as fun as, oh, what is this one again? Oh, that's Demeter. That's Demeter Fist. I think that makes sense to me. I think that's what makes sense. It's not very interesting. It's not like a super interesting aspect, but it's good and it's still fun overall, I think. All right, next up we got Aspect of Eris for the rail. For 4 seconds after absorbing your specialist blast, you deal more damage, and it's between 15 and 75%. So that's a big range. So a low-level Eris aspect is not gonna feel that great, but when you think about it, the additional ammo that Zag aspect gives you does very little most of the time. So this is what I was talking about, where you're almost better off using Aspect of Eris pretty much every time over Aspect of Zagreus for the rail. It just makes more sense. Also, that bonus damage from this Eris effect is global. So what global damage means that every single source of damage gets this bonus. Well, okay, not quite everything. No, it doesn't affect like the summon keepsakes and some super things like that. But everything else, like your cast damage, your attack damage, your special damage, your dash damage, all that stuff gets this massive bonus effect. That makes Aspects of Eris super powerful. Very, 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 very powerful aspect here. It's pretty straightforward. Like, there's not much else to say about it. It's just good. You know what I mean? You could use almost anything, and it'll be amazing, honestly. You put Dionysus on the attack, and as long as you keep getting that special buff, you're gonna have an amazing time. You're gonna be dealing tons and tons of damage, honestly. So having said that, it's gonna be a high S. It's a very high S. I don't have as much fun with it personally anymore, myself, just because I've used it almost too much, I'd say. But it's really good. I could recommend it if you're thinking about where to put your Titan's Blood for the rail still, because you can't really go wrong with starting to level it up, I think. It's just too good, honestly. So that's what I would recommend there, really. So it's just too good to turn down, and I think it can be fun when you're first getting used to it and stuff like that. I think it should be above Chiron, because the number of different boons you can use on like the attack and the special, it's a bit more diverse than what Chiron does a little bit, just a little bit, I think. So yeah, great aspect, really recommend for a new player. Next up, we have Aspect of Hestia. After you manually reload, your next shot is empowered, and that empowered shot damage goes anywhere between 50 and 150%. It also has a huge range, a massive range on it compared to others. Now, it's kind of annoying to have to manually reload between every single attack, which is how you'd optimally play Hera, but that base damage is enormous, you know? It's not great at low levels, so you'd kind of want to invest all the Titan Blood in it. And then the issue with Hestia there is that it's kind of a one-trick pony. You'd always play Hestia as just shoot, reload, shoot, reload, shoot, reload. Like, the combo doesn't really change between different runs. Doesn't matter which boons you get. Doesn't really matter which hammers you get. They're still just going to be doing that same basic attack pattern. And it's too bad because it's incredibly high-powered. And it's incredibly safe, because I mentioned that huge range on it. It's actually the aspect I use for no-hit runs, because it's so safe. It just lets you stay so far away from enemies, and it deals a huge amount of damage right away that you don't have to really worry about damage the entire run if you have it all the way leveled up. It's kind of crazy. I think what kills it again is the fact that it's not that fun, unfortunately. Like, it just does that one thing, you know? So therefore, I think this is it's a low B, you know? It's too bad, because it's like there's some aspects of it that pull it to an S, but then, you know, the one-trick pony pulls it down to a D almost. So it kind of winds up right in between, I think. I think it winds up being a low B, because I think the fun factor is quite limited with Hestia. All right, last but certainly not least, Aspect of Lucifer. You have Igneous Eden, which launches volatile hellfire, and the hellfire blast damage goes between 50 and 100. So what is it talking about here? You have a laser, is what you have here, like from Congo.
I'm on the endangered species list.
And when you use the special, it drops this ball on the ground, which can explode for a pretty big chunk of damage. That's what that Hellfire Blast damage is. Now, luckily, you don't necessarily have to level up Lucifer all the way to have fun with it. You can have a level 1 Lucifer and have a pretty good time by mostly just using the attack. Typically, if you're gonna win in the middle of reloading, you would throw out a special just because you got time to kill, but, you know, if you're not playing Optimi, whatever, just have fun with it, you know. So that's kind of one of the good things about Lucifer. The other nice thing is that a lot of different attacks work well with it. Zeus works well. Dionysus works well. In terms of like Artemis or Aphrodite, the different percentage gods, maybe that's not that great, you know. But I think Lucifer has a lot of diverse builds to it, I think. And it's actually one of the more fun, hidden aspects I think that we have out there. I don't think it's a crazy high power level. I think it's sort of, you know, sort of middle of the road kind of thing. I do think it's quite fun and quite interesting, though. And a lot of people really love it, I can tell. And it makes you try to play it pretty diversely, too, I think, at least. So having said that, our final aspect is gonna be drop. I don't know if I can get a drum roll sound effect, but, you know, like budget cuts, what can I say, you know? I think I'm gonna drop it right below Hera. It's sort of a high A in terms, because I just think it's a lot of fun. It's cool, it's interesting. The visual effects, which I haven't really brought up with any other aspect, are actually amazing with Lucifer. They went through a lot of effort to make the laser different colors for all the different boons and stuff like that. So I think that just makes it really fun, honestly. So I can kind of recommend it to a new player just because it doesn't, just put one Titan Blood in it and then try it out. Sorry, put one level in it and try it out. And yeah, I think you'll just have a pretty fun time with it. All right, guys, that's it for my tier list here. I mean, looking back, I don't really want to change anything about it, I think. It is what it is. It's just an opinion. You know, it's mostly what I have fun with and what I think a new player would be able to utilize well and also have fun with. It's kind of weird how it all evened out, but whatever. I shouldn't manipulate it to try to make it less even, I guess, huh? All right, just remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a beautiful day. Mwah!